Alternative accounts. And other accounts of the confrontation between Horus and Seth are extremely brief. In the pyramid text, Horus captures Seth and brings him before Osiris. Seth is then judged in the court of Geb for his violence against Osiris. Here, Horus plays only a minimal role as the case is judged between Seth and Osiris. It concludes with Osiris being awarded his kingdom on earth and the sky, while Seth is punished by being forced to carry Osiris. Seth then works with Horus for the benefit of the dead king. They unite to slay a serpent and provide ladders for the king to ascend to the sky. The pyramid text also makes repeated references to the injuries suffered by Horus and Seth during their fighting. Seth's testicles, symbol of his sexual potencies, are brought back to him by a messenger, while Horus' eyes, representing his clarity of visions, were similarly returned. Even Thoth is injured. His arms has to be restored. In a further spell, Seth takes Horus' eyes in the eastern side of the sky. The gods then fly across the winding waterway on one of Thoth's wings to intercede on Horus' behalf for its return. Seth tramples Horus' eyes and devours it, but Horus eventually takes it back through violence or petitioning. The coffin text describes Osiris as squeezing off Seth's testicles for Horus, and apparently, according to a later source, a legal hearing was held in the great palace of Heliopolis concerning Horus' taking of Seth's testicles. The new kingdom, great hymn to Osiris, represents Isis as bringing Horus before the board hall of Geb. The Aeneid are jubilant at his arrival, welcoming him as heir of Osiris, and they crown him at Geb's command. The world immediately falls under his control, and Seth is given to him apparently to be executed. The disturber suffered hurt. His fate overtook the offender. The world was now ordered again. Abundance is established by his laws. Roads are open. Ways are free. How the two shores prosper. Evil is fled. Crime is gone. The island has peace under its lord. Similarly, in the Ptolemaic period book of the victory over Seth, Geb presides over a court hearing convened to decide who should be king of Egypt. Seth's crimes are reported during the proceedings, and Horus, supported by Thoth, is given a verdict for his favor. He receives deeds of inheritance and is crowned king. while Seth is exiled to the land of the Aztecs. Another version for the tale inscribed on the Shabango stone, now in the British Museum again, represents a little differently. Here, Gab, acting as judge, separates Horus and Seth and forbids them from continuing to fight. He proclaims Seth the king of Upper Egypt and Horus the king of Lower Egypt. The dividing line sighted where Osiris had drowned. Later, Geb changes his mind, however, and decides to award the entire country to Horus, since he is the son of Osiris. Placha's versions of Horus' triumph. Just as Placha presided an account of the death of Osiris, he also records the myth of the triumph of Horus. He writes that Osiris returned from the dead to train the young Horus for his battle against Seth. Osiris asked his son what he thought was the most noble of all things, to which Horus replied, to avenge one's father and mother when they have suffered evil. Before the battle began, many of Seth's supporters defected to Horus's side, blustering his numbers, and then Seth's concubine, the hippopotamus goddesses, Tauret, abandoned her evil partner. Despite Seth's depleted numbers, the battle raged for many days until Horus finally prevailed. Captured, Seth was then brought to the young king in chains, but Isis refused to execute him, infiltrating Horus, who removed Isis' royal diadem. In his fit of anger, Thoth, ever calm presence, simply replaced it with a helmet in the shape of a cow's head. Seth accused Horus of being illegitimate, but Thoth defended Horus and proved his right to the throne. Seth returns to power. After Horus has ascended the throne, Seth attempted to regain power, taking control of the delta and performing many sacrilege. During this time, Seth defiled temples, drove out priests, stole cult implements and divine emblems, damaged and destroyed temples, property, uprooted and downed sacred trees, caught and ate sacred animals and fish, blasphemed against deities, disrupted festivals, killed worshippers, and stole offerings. Re was unaware of these acts until Isis shouted to the sky, yelling that Seth had returned without his knowledge. Ultimately, Horus was again victorious and Seth was exiled. The end of the reign of gods. With his final defeat of Seth, Horus ruled as king of Egypt for 300 years. He exacted revenge on anyone who had supported Seth, destroying their nomes and towns so that the blood of Seth fell in them. Statues of Seth were destroyed, and his name was removed from wherever it was found. Su mourns when he is in a state of grief. We are told moaning pervades Sepramu, the southern oasis, and the Bahara oasis wail. Evil circulates within them. Hetzep cries out, for its Lord is not with it. Wadu is an empty place, and Ambos is destroyed. Their mansions have been demolished. None of their inhabitants exist. Their masters is no more. After Horus, the throne passed to Thoth, who ruled for 7,726 years. The kingship next passed to Mayat, and then on to its demigods, who together ruled for a total of 7,714 years. These demigods had unusual names such as Does Not Thirst Cloud of the Shore, Possessors of Noble Women, and Protectors of Noble Women, and Protectors of Noble Women Spirit Kings, Aku. Then ruled groups together into 9 categories and connected them with particular locations such as Harikanpolis. I don't know these words. Harikanpolis, Puto, and Heliopolis. These were succeeded by the followers of Horus, and then by human kings. The unnamed pre-dynastic kings of Upper and Lower Egypt were collected together as the souls of Nekhen and Pet, regarded as Bu, souls of the Lower Egyptian city of Batu, Pe, and Nekhen, Hyrcanopolis. Respectively, those of Pe were shown with falcon heads, and those of Nekhen as jackal heads. They were powerful deities who assisted the king in life and death. The Pharaoh. And so we reach the time of the historical pharaohs. In life, each king was Horus, sitting upon the Horus throne and possessing the inheritance of Geb. He was also the son of Re, acting as a deputy to the sun god and charged with ensuring the stability of the world, just as Re had done personally at the beginning of time. The king might have been the product of the union of a human mother and a god, but he did not enter the ranks of the divine until his coronation. During this grand ceremony, the royal Ka, the spirit of kinship, entered the mortal man's body and transformed himself into a pharaoh. Through the coronation's rituals, the man was reborn, his physical body infused with the divine power. This power, however, was limited by its human vessel, which continued to age and inhabited the same weaknesses as any other human. When a god died, the kingship continued on exhibiting a new host with each death. In this manner, the king was not quite a god and not quite a human. Instead, he had his own sphere of existence below the true gods, but above mankind. His destiny was to act as intermediary intermediary between the two pleasing gods for the benefit of humanity, hoping to secure their divine benefactions. The king pleased the gods by ensuring Ma'at existed throughout Egypt, by making offerings to the god, by defending and expanding the country's border, and by killing off enemies. Despite his obvious human frailties and personal characters, the king existed as a mythological figure. To posterity, his decisions were insightful and perfect, his appearance ever youthful and strong. Alone he rode and out at the front of the army, discriminating his opponents, protecting his own troops from all danger. His acts were always successful, his behavior pious and just. This ideal mythological pharaoh loomed large on every temple wall, smiting the enemies of Egypt or offering of the gods. His perfect indeed were inscribed on the wall of nobles, tombs, and royal stelae. Through to history, the king, as fallible individuals, was smothered between the finest linen cloak of ideology. The mythic pharaoh was ever present and almost unchanging and reassuring symbol of order in an unpredictable world. Wow. So, part 2, the living world, or explaining the world around us. The mythic environment. The world of gods and their mythology did not end with transfers of the crown to human rulers. Deities were manifest in and oversaw the forces of nature, so that an active mythology permeated every aspect of daily life. Myth grew up around settlements and natural features, often incorporating great gods such as Osiris, Horus, or Anubis, or centering on so-called minor gods, deities that were predominantly local in character. There was a rich mythology of place, providing a history of the gods worshipped in local temple, and an identity and character for the town of Nome. The gods' responsibilities and limitations. Just like people, the god had rules and responsibilities, jobs in their cosmos that only they could perform, as well as limitations. The gods of ancient Egypt were not omniscient and not omnipotent, but they could manifest themselves in different forms simultaneously, allowing them to remain in the sky or the afterlife realm of the dot, while sending their bold souls or personalities to appear on earth. Through a god, Ba or bull, you could feel his force, but the deity proper always remained distant. no matter what form they took. However, they were places that even the gods could not reach. On the whole, for example, the gods were unable to enter Nun. Their authority ended at the limits of the created world. Even in the parts of Dot, in areas beyond the reach of the sun's ray, they had no power. Furthermore, the majority of Egypt gods are limited by their associated towns, area, or region. Further, an Egyptian traveled from his hometown, the less able his town god would be to aid him. So although a deity might be elsewhere, perhaps spending time in the sky or in doubt, he or she might only have authority over a fixed geographic space on earth. For this reason, a traveler prayed to the god of the regions he was in, and if he did not know what name to use, he would simply pray to the Netjar. That Netjar, the word we translate as God. Through its means, whichever force had responsibility over a particular space. A god's responsibility was unique, a cosmic role in the created world that had no deity could perform. Nut assured the sky continued to exist. Shu force kept the sky and ground separate. Happy governed the inundations, yearly occurrence. Osiris enabled his life to spring from death, universal regeneration. The god Ming ensured fertility, because each god's role was unique. If a god wished to perform another god's function, the two had to inhibit one another, a process called syncretization, by the Egyptologists, and described as the gods resting in one another by the ancient Egyptians. Gods were not all-powerful, and thus needed the force provided by another god's responsibility to perform certain functions. So for the god Amun to perform a fertility role, he and Ming, god of fertility, inhibit one another temporarily to become Amun Ming, a new god who was at once both. Similarly, Amun was embodied, invisible, and hidden power might join Re, visible power, to form the all-powerful Amun. Re, the totality of visible and invisible power, the king of the gods. In the middle of the night, the dying sun joined with Osiris to be empowered by his regenerative energy. The two gods then separated again, allowing the regenerated sun to continue on his way into the dawn sky. Wow. The created world. At its simplest level, the created world, the world in which the Egyptian lived, as organized by Re, the time of his departure from earth, was divided into sky and land, and also included a third place called Duat. Beyond the created world lay Nun, the infinite expanse of motionless and dark water that surrounded the earth on all sides. In this bubble of creation, the gods, the kings, the blessed dead, and humanity all existed as part of the same community. Every aspect of creation had a divine explanation. The wind was a manifestation of Shu. For example, though he also encompassed the entire atmosphere, the length of the sky is for my strides, and the breadth of the earth is for my foundation. The sky vault was the force of the goddess Nut. Her consort Geb was the earth, together the physical manifestation of the Egyptian gods. Their force as principle of nature accounted for all natural phenomenon, though they themselves, their true forms, might be elsewhere. Through personification, the intangible forces of the god gained forms, allowing the Egyptians to interact with them. At the same time, the forces of nature, sometimes benevolent, sometimes destructive, were placed into an order system that assigned a named controller who could be praised, cursed, or begged for aid depending on the situation. If your house blew down or was flooded, you had someone to blame. If a storm was coming, you knew who to beg to avert it.